All right, Coach Jim Johnson, thanks for coming on. This is the Quality Values Podcast. So the core question is, what are your values in the context of your story? So um, I keep it broad because I want to be able to talk to anyone from any field, but it's specific enough that there's kind of a direction to the conversation. So John Gehring, one of your buddies, someone you do a podcast with. I had a call with him a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned a really cool story about um, an inspirational kid that was on your team that he had some he was on the autism spectrum. You put him in and it went viral. So I just wanted to jump in right there. Could you tell me all about that story?
Yeah, if you don't mind, because I'm big on leadership and core values is one of the things I talk to leaders. So I will share that two things that I really encourage leaders is to get clarity on their own personal mission statement. When I did that, my mission statement is to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And then, we spend a lot of time talking to our players about core values. Like one of my big core values is respect. Another one is growth. I want to be able to grow. And the third core value for me is service. I want to help others, as I mentioned in my personal mission statement. Now, to answer your question about the inspirational story, I was a longtime high school basketball coach, and I was at my final school. I was a head coach for 30 years at four different high schools. The last school was for 20 years. It was actually my hometown. I grew up in a suburb of Rochester called Greece. We have four high schools, but when I grew up, there were three. And I actually, the last 20 years, I coached at one of the other high schools, one I did not attend, and we were going pretty good. We were winning every year, but we were struggling. I was kind of known as the coach that couldn't win the big one. We kept losing in the postseason. But life changed dramatically in another way. I had a young man come into our program. His name was Jason McElwain. Everybody knows him as J Mac, and as you mentioned, he's on the autism spectrum. And he tried out three consecutive years, never made the team, but he served as our team manager. And I got very close to him because he just loved basketball and he wanted to do anything to help our program. In fact, he would mention to me, Coach, we're going to help you win your first Section 5 championship. I said, oh, I hope so, J Mac. But his senior year, when he didn't make the team, and just to give people context of his perseverance, he's the only young man that I ever tried out for our team three consecutive years without making it. We had a couple try out a second time, but three times was amazing to me. So I wanted to give him a gift for his senior year, and I told him that I was going to give him a uniform for our final home game where we honored the seniors. And I did, and it was really cool to see him embrace his parents before the game. It was on February 15th of 2006. And then with just over 4 minutes to go, I put him in the game. The place just erupted. And we had a good student body following. They called themselves the Six Man. And they gave him a standing ovation. But what I didn't know, Jake, was one of our parents had made these pictures of Jason's face, like placards, and put them on paint sticks and gave him the student body. And when Jason walked on the floor for the first time, they showed those paint sticks. And normally I don't get very emotional. I get emotional, but not in a heartbreaking way. But I was so touched. I sat down and tears actually started to fall down my face. I was profoundly touched on how the students greet him. Well, Jason gets in his first varsity game. First time he gets the ball, he has a three-pointer from the right corner. He lets it go. The crowd stands in anticipation. It misses by like 6 feet. And I kid people. I know you're not supposed to pray in the public schools, but I was praying, dear God, please help him get one basket. Well, the next possession, he has a much shorter shot from about 10 feet away. And this time it hit the backboard, hit the rim, and fell off. And the crowd groaned. And I'm thinking, all right, God's starting to listen. We're getting closer. And the third possession, he has another three-pointer, this time from the right wing. He lets it go. Magic. It goes in. The place erupts. And I'm thinking to myself, God must be a basketball fan. Not only has Jason scored, he's got a three-pointer and can't get any better than this, right? Wrong. For the next 3 minutes, Jason turns into his boyhood idol, the late Kobe Bryant, and he starts making shot after shot. And before I share two quick things, I do want to share with the audience that 6 months after that game, Jason was up for the ESPY Award for the greatest sports moment of the year in California. And one of the other finalists, I kid you not, is his idol, Kobe Bryant. Kobe has scored 81 points that year for the Lakers. So he meets his idol and beats him out for the SB. Well, how did he do that? Because it wasn't just one 3-pointer. Going back to the story, he makes another three. Then he makes a basket where his foot is on the line, and the place is just in pure bedlam. And the two things I'll never forget: with a minute to go, I'm still sitting on the bench, tears still flowing down my face, and I get a tap on my shoulder. I look behind me, it's J Mac's mother, and she's bawling her eyes out, and she whispers in my ear, Coach, this is the best gift you could ever give him, my son. What would you have done if you heard that? I cried harder. I was so touched. Then this is how the game ends. With about 10 seconds to go, our opponent, Spencerport, and I want to give kudos to their coach and the players. They were really good sports that night. They score a basket, and our teammate throws or takes it out, and he usually throws it to our point guard. But for some reason, he throws it to J Mac. And J Mac's dribbling down the court, and I'm looking up this at the scoreboard, and it's clicking down 7-6. I'm thinking they're just going to let him go in and make a short layup. Oh no, he pulls up like 2 feet from the arc. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, J Mac, don't shoot from there. That's way too far. He launches this rainbow. Swish. I look over and the whole crowd, like the movie Rudy, for anybody with perspective, ran on the court. And our players put Jason up on his shoulders and he's got the game ball over his head. And I'll never forget, because at that point I had no idea how many points he had scored. And our public address announcer comes on and says, the leading scorer for Greece Athena tonight, J-Mac, with 20 points, including 6 3-pointers. And it was just truly amazing. There were so many lessons, but I will say one, I'll jump right out to me, was that we had actually had a difficult year. We finally had gotten the group back together, but it was really neat because I never asked the players on the floor to pass Jason the ball. Yet in those last 4 minutes, out of their own hearts, they passed the ball to him every time. And that's, to me, the essence of teamwork, when you can shine the light on one of your teammates.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an incredible story. Had when you'd seen Jason J Mac in the gym prior, was he a 3-point shooter, or was that did it was
You know,
did he
he was
step up for
very
the moment?
he was very small in stature, which was, was kind of a detriment as far as playing on the team, because he was not a real good athlete either. But to his credit, he had a big heart and he practiced all the time. So he would always come to practice early. He was always working out with the other guys, and he'd rebound for him, and they'd have him shoot some. And he was working in his driveway. So he spent a lot of time on it. But, I wrote a book about it called The Coach and a Miracle. So it's something that I'm proud of, but I don't think we're going to see that again,
Yeah,
certainly in no time.
that's incredible. So let's back up for context a little bit. Um, what brought you into basketball coaching? Were you a player? Did you always know you were going to be a coach? How'd you end up being Coach Jim Johnson?
Yeah, so actually, I got to give my late dad, unfortunately, just passed away about 4 months ago. But he was my high school basketball coach, and I played all sports growing up. But I really got into basketball in 8th grade, and then I ended up playing 3 years for him. And basketball, I love a lot of sports, but basketball became my first love. And my dad actually went into administration after I graduated, so I was the only one. I had 3 younger siblings that unfortunately didn't get a chance to play for my dad. But it's something that I just fell in love with, the game of basketball, and I went into teaching and coaching to kind of follow my dad's footsteps. And I actually got my administrative certification early in my career, but I just fell in love with coaching, especially basketball. And I coached for 35 years and I loved it. So.
What about the coaching are you drawn to? Is it working with the players? Is it the schematics? Is it being a leader? Why do you think that fits your personality?
But that's a great question, because I will say at the beginning it was because I love basketball. Okay. And I just loved everything about basketball. But as I started to really get in and becoming a head coach, I became a head coach at 25. That first job didn't work out very well. We won one game and they let me go after one season. So it was a humbling start, but fortunately I stuck with it and things got a lot better. But then I really got into, as I was trying to uh, help our program be much better, really started to study a lot about leadership. In fact, I talk in one of my leadership presentations about the 7 keys that I talk about. And when I studied leadership, and I know that really, as I studied more about leadership, it was really about building relationship with your players, and that I took a lot of pride. I spent a lot of time building relationships with our players, and it ended up doing really well. And just to give you context, Jake, I mentioned that I was the coach that couldn't win the big one. Well, Jason's senior year, after he had that magical game, he had to go back as our team manager, and yet we won our first Section 5 championship that year. And then Jason came back and helped me my last 9 years, and we won 5 more together. So he was kind of my good luck charm. But so I really became a student of leadership, and one of the things I kid educators, I do a lot of speaking in the educational sector as well as business, is that the 3 R's of education is not reading, arithmetic, and writing. It's relationships, relationships, relationships.
Yeah, I love that. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Um, kind of going off of that a little bit. One of my friends, John, someone I grew up with, he's a football coach,
Yep.
and he's always been a gifted speaker. Like he would give a lot of speeches at school, and so I've just always had belief in my buddy. And now he's a high school teacher and a football coach. So what kind of specific advice would you give to someone like that who wants to grow a career as a coach, and is kind of, like you were at age 25, starting off in the coaching journey? You said you dove into leadership, but what would you suggest to someone like my buddy like John? What specific
Yeah,
steps
so
could he
that's
take?
another. I enjoy the question because I think the first thing is you got to study leadership. So the first person I always kid people is the first person you got to lead is yourself. So you're studying, how to be a better leader of yourself, and then the ability to influence others with, leadership. So the advice I would give would be just three. There's a lot of things I could say, but I'll break it down into three. One is become a student of leadership. Two, in our case where you're talking, he was a football coach, I was a basketball coach, is study the sport. So you really know as much as about the sport. And then the third piece is what I call the CST. I think effective leaders are the chief storytellers. And you said your friend's a good speaker, and that's something that really helped me become a much better speaker. In fact, I encourage leaders to always have stories because stories stick, so stories sell. And the things that I learned about stories is I would share a lot of stories with my players, and I used them as both warnings and examples. So warnings, these are things that we can learn from people making big mistakes, and then the examples are these are things we can learn from people. These are the ideas you want to try to follow and emulate.
Super cool. What were some of your biggest influences in your as you were studying leadership? Who are some of the leadership leaders that you looked up to that you read? I know Maxwell and some of these guys out there,
Right.
but yeah, who are some of your biggest influences?
Well, the two that jump out because I am a big John Maxwell. I've read a lot of his books, but the two that jump out to me, unfortunately, are both passed away. But I learned a lot. One was in the basketball genre, probably considered the greatest college basketball coach of all time, the late John Wooden. And in fact, one of my parents knew Coach Wooden. I got some signed things from him, which I cherish to this day.
Cool.
But I studied a lot about his methods and how he did it. For your listeners, John Wooden was the UCLA basketball coach. They won 10 national championships in his last 12 years. So that's pretty good, and 7 in a row. And then from a personal growth, the guy that influenced me the most, and I did follow, as we said, John Maxwell, before that, Zig Ziglar, and Brian Tracy and Les Brown and all these. But the guy that influenced me the most was the late Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn, ROHN, really made a big difference for me from a life perspective. I learned a lot from Jim Rohn. So those are probably, it's funny because, I've had different mentors, but a lot of my mentors have been just people that I've studied. I've read their information, I listened to their audio and video programs and learned a lot. But those two that jump out to me, it would be John Wooden and Jim Rohn.
Awesome. I've heard a lot about John Wooden. He's come up in some of the business books I've read, and I know
Yeah.
would he'd have people practice putting on their socks.
Right. Yeah.
Everything was
Yeah.
dialed
Exactly.
in. I don't know Roan as well. What's his story?
Well, Jim Rohn was a guy that struggled early in life, got a mentor, and this mentor really helped straight out. And he was known kind of America's business coach. The guy that he mentored that you probably have heard of is Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
So Yeah,
Okay.
Tony Robbins worked for Jim Rohn, so that's how Tony got his start. And then, obviously Tony exploded his career. Another guy Jim Rohn mentored is a guy named Darren Hardy that's really big today. Darren's probably in his 50s. He's a big personal growth guy as well. Uh, but so Jim Rohn, traveled the world, and he has all those audio and different video programs and stuff. But he was just a fascinating how he spoke, and shared a lot of really powerful stories that stuck for me.
Super cool. Um, all right, so let's fast forward. Now you're a leadership coach, right? So you've kind of taken what you've learned as a basketball coach, um, as a leader and as a basketball coach, and you're kind of going up to the leadership leading. When did you kind of make that transition, and what was behind the thought there? Is it something that happened naturally, or did you consciously decide, I'm gonna shift a little bit away from basketball? Obviously, basketball, I'm sure, will always be there for you, but yeah,
Right.
what was that transition like?
Well, I do. It's funny because I was a lot of people still call me coach because I was a basketball coach for a long time. But I do a little bit of personal coaching, but actually, my forte is I do a lot of keynote speaking and workshops. So that's and I brand myself as an inspirational leader. So I started with my first 9 or 10 years just with one speech. It was called "Dreams Really Do Come True." It was talking about Jason's story, and I shared 6 keys to help people make their dreams come true. And then when I retired, I've been out of coaching now for 9 years. I wanted to do more with leadership. I still share Jason's story because people love that. But now I do more leadership and team culture, and I do some breakout sessions on leadership and goal setting and those types of things. So I do a lot of speaking around the country. I think I've spoken 26 states. I've spoken Canada. I'm hoping to even become more global with that. And then I do a lot of things to just try to share content. Like I do a weekly blog and a monthly newsletter. And as we've talked a little bit, I'm part of a podcast to help young and emerging leaders called the Limitless Leadership Lounge. And I, do some videos and those kind of things. So I try to share things I learn to help people because one of our goals with the podcast is to help young and emerging leaders. So
Super cool. And then what are your workshops like? Like what does that look like? I'm always curious how these things work. So when you go, you do keynote, is it companies that hire you generally?
yeah, it's a combination of companies and still the educational sector. I've
Okay.
spoke in educational conferences. I've spoke to particular schools. I've spoke to students, staff, that kind of thing. And with the business sector, a lot of it is different leadership levels. I've spoke to sales teams, depending on what they're trying to do. So you do customize. And often when you're at a conference, when you're one of the keynote speakers, they'll also ask you, can you do a breakout session? And really, the difference is in a keynote, you may have the audience do some interactive things, but in a breakout, you're going to do even more. You're going to get them a little bit more, and in the keynote, you definitely are weaving in stories. In the breakout, yes, you're going to have some stories and stuff, but you're trying to make it even more interactive in the breakout or workshop as opposed to the keynote. Because the keynote usually you have anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes of workshop. Sometimes there's 60 to 90, sometimes a little bit longer than that, depending on what they're looking for.
And then let's say you have a successful keynote with a successful breakout. What do you hope to see in your audience? What kind of change are you hoping to make? What's if everything goes perfectly, um, what are you giving
Yeah,
your
so
listeners?
well, that's a great question, and I think the first thing is like with my dreams, the thing that I really want to help people with, and Jason was a great example, is that I pretty much all people have dreams, and most of us have a big dream, but I believe most people don't think they can make their dreams come true. So what I want to do is inspire them through Jason's story, but also to give them some tangible takeaways to help them make their dreams come true. And then with the leadership, the zero a little bit, I want them to be able to be a more effective leader. And I clarify that base. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, is how to lead yourself, how to design systems and processes for yourself to be the best person you could be, like having a personal mission statement, having core values, and then be transitioning it and transforming to make your team much more effective because you're a better leader. As I mentioned, my career, I really stumbled out of the gate. As I said, we won one game, and then even after 7 years, Jake, I was like 40 games under 500, and after 30 years, I was something like 200 games over 500. So the biggest transition, and that's what I want to do, is I was kind of known as a turnaround specialist. My last position, I stayed for 20 years, and we never had a losing season, and I really started to get clarity. And so what I want to do is share how to be a better leader and how to transform your team. Because the two questions I always ask leaders is, first question is, how do you get to the top? And I think that's by growing yourself and getting understanding processes and systems. But the more difficult question, because you see it all the time, you see it in sports, you see the one hit wonder in music, is how do you stay at the top? Because that's the more difficult thing, and that's where I really try to talk to them about. I think the most effective leaders are people that keep growing themselves, but also grow their team members to be leaders. And when you do that, when the team is more team led as opposed to just the leader led, I think that's when you have the best teams and you have consistency. As I always used to kid our players, tradition doesn't graduate. So yes, we graduated players every year, but our tradition became very powerful, and people believed in our systems and wanted to be part of something. And one thing I encourage leaders, Jake, I'll close with this, is that we found that we want to make our program challenging. It's not easy to play in our program, but we also wanted to make it caring so that they believed that we were going to care about them and help them be great people as well as great basketball players.
That's awesome. I'm curious. So you mentioned the first 7 seasons you're coaching, you're 40 games below 500. The last 20, was it 20 or 30 year?
2023. So it was 30
23.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last 23 year, 200 games over. What changed, and what was the difference between the last 23 years and the first 7? What changes did you make, or what was there different positions you were in? What was the difference in those
Well,
two eras?
you know, I will say that the thing is I really started to spend a lot of time growing myself. So I spent a lot of time. I encourage leaders. I have a little side thing. A little keynote I do once in a while called the 10 questions all leaders should be able to answer. And one of them is, do you have a personal growth plan? So the big thing is I really took a lot of pride on getting better myself and having personal growth, because I think it starts with a leader. When they see that you're modeling and leading by example, that's a really powerful thing. Then the second thing is I spent a lot more time after my first 7 years on building team culture and building a culture where people were attracted to be part of our program, and we were attracting the right type of person. Like one of the things I talk about in one of my leadership talks on culture is, do you have a system on how you pick the people? In basketball, obviously we needed people that liked and were pretty good at basketball, right? Well, it's the same thing in the business. You want people that are going to fill that role. But then what are the other characteristics you're looking for? I'll give you a couple examples. We wanted we over mean guys. We wanted guys that cared about the team first, and that's why we try to get our know to our players, a relationships factor. We also wanted guys that wanted to be coached and wanted to grow and get better. So those are a couple of the things that we were really looking for to attract the right players for our program.
How much emphasis was like let's say you've got two potential recruits. One of them is 6'10", can jump through the roof. The other guy is 6'2", but a we over me guy. How do you kind of weigh the raw talent? Maybe this guy doesn't have the culture yet, but you could develop it, versus someone who's already got the culture, and it's just a matter of fitting them into the system. What are you looking for? What are some red flags maybe? with those talented guys that even if they've got it all, it's not quite right.
Yeah, that's why I think you got to take time to build relationships, and that's why I encourage leaders, and we did a lot of this with one-on-one meetings, so that you're giving them clarity, and sharing things like these are the things we really like about you, your strengths, and here are some of the things you got to consider strongly changing to be part of our program because we get enamored in business, we get enamored in athletics, by the person that's really talented. And going back to what I mentioned before about the leader being the chief storyteller, those are some things I would always tell. Like I would tell a story about, I'm not going to pick on any uh, player, but hey, how come this guy's, he scores a lot of points, but his team never wins? And I'll tell you it's why is because he's selfish. He only thinks about his stats and not the team stats. So I was really trying to get clarity of what it was to be successful. And there were times, certainly a talented player, we wanted to track them, but if they didn't, we'd give them some chances, but if they didn't figure it out, then, we had to cut the cord sometimes. And that's never easy. And I think that one of the things that I always tell leaders is being an effective communicator is having clarity is kindness. So being very clear of what your expectations and so there's no misunderstanding. So if you do have to cut a player or, even eliminate them from your program, that they're clear that they knew why they were being cut. So
Super cool. I think about in the basketball where like Jalen Brunson, Draymond Green, some guys that weren't drafted super high. They're
yeah,
not the most athletic guys, but they've won at every level.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, big team guys. I want to dive back into the your coaching career. So those first 7 years, you're 40 games below 500. Why? Like what inside you kept you going? Why? How did you know that this is still your path, even though the results haven't been where you want them so far?
Well, one of the things that and Jason really augmented this even more, but is I believe the best, most effective leaders, people that have success, is they're perseverant. They have clarity about their mission. They have clarity what they're all about. What they stand for, and that's what I started to really establish. In that after struggling is that I got clarity about who I was, and I knew I really wanted to continue to grow and figure out how I could be a more successful coach. From not only uh, the things that sometimes are intangible, like building great relationships, and also the tangible results of are we winning more games than we're losing? Are we contending for championships? So those are the things that I was trying to combine in just and the other thing is, going back to I mentioned those two questions. How do you stay at the top? Uh, I just really got that drive, where I was excited when we won a championship, but after the season ended, I take a few days off, and then I was back at it. I hit the drive, and I got back, and that's why I think getting out and meeting with your players, and figuring out who really is excited about coming back. Sometimes we after our season meetings, there were some guys that you could tell they just weren't interested in making the commitment for next year, and that was okay. I said, go do your thing, but we wanted guys that were going to be committed to our program, and we got that going, and then our teams became much more successful.
Yeah.
So
Cool. And then I wanted to when you were going over your keynote and your workshops, you were mentioning that you help people um, plan towards their dreams, even if they
yeah,
seem far off. I'm definitely someone, I've always kind of been a big dreamer.
yeah.
So what does that look like? What's your process for reverse engineering the dream, or maybe reverse engineering isn't part of the process, but how does that work exactly with you?
Yeah, so it's the things I teach. So I'll just give you real quick my highlights of my six keys. And so the first one is finding your passion. And what I really encourage in people is that you want to be really make a big dream come true. It's got to be obsession. I know I was obsessed about coaching basketball. I spent a lot of time in it. So there's no shortcut to that. But the concept is that I really thoroughly enjoy it. but I'm willing to put the time into it. So that was number one. Number two is getting clarity of who you are. So the personal mission statement, which we talked about in your core values, what do you stand for? Number three is goal setting. We all hear about that, but we spend a lot of time with our players, what we call when we think it, ink it. We wanted everybody to write it down. Then we taught them how to use goal cards. Is something I still do every day. I wake up every morning. I give myself a high five. I tell myself we're going to have a great day. And then I have a bunch of goal cards that I read in front of a mirror, kind of affirmations to really reinforce what my most important goals and dreams are. Number four, we've mentioned, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is perseverance. Things are not always going to go like you hope, but that's where I call it the never give up mindset. And there are times that you should give up some things in your life because they're just not right for you. But you got to figure out if it's a really big dream, you're going to go through those trials and tribulations. Number five is you got to keep working and preparing to what I call carpe diem, which of course means to seize the day. You got to be ready to seize the day, like JMac did. You can't get a much better example. You just spend a lot of time and effort to get ready because when you get your opportunity, you want to make sure that you're ready for it. And then the last one is you got to have the right people around you. So I think you got to be an effective team player, and you got to draw the right people, yeah, because the right people are going to help you with your dreams. And we all know there are a number of people, often unfortunately in your life, that are going to be detrimental to your dreams. Oh, you can't make that come true. And those naysayers, you got to make sure you can't eliminate. If it's your mother, you're not going to eliminate her from your life, but you just sometimes you got to ignore the naysayers and surround yourself with people that have done big things, and encourage you and help you and mentor you, because again, going back, you're going to have those times where things aren't going right, and that's where you got to hang tough, and getting the right people around you helps that immensely.
Cool. And then to kind of turn this question onto you. So, what are your dreams? You've mentioned you're retired, but I mean, I can tell just from this conversation, you're not, just drinking pina coladas on the beach retired. You're
I'm not.
you're focusing on your passions retired. So what are your dreams? What are the goals that you're still pursuing? And how do you see that going over
Yeah,
these
so I'll
next few
break
years?
it down in a few things. So first of all, just for my own, I want to live as long as I can. So I have a personal health plan that I spend a lot of time. I really take care of myself. I'm 65 years old, and I want to live as long as I can. If I can go over 100, that'd be great. But I want to live quality life. So I know taking care of it. And one of the things I really encourage leaders is highly effective leaders have energy consistently. And that's something, if you don't take care of yourself, it's hard to have consistent energy. From a professional standpoint, the two things I really want to do is I want to make an impact. So I want to become a global speaker. I want to speak all over the world and make an impact, with my messages. And then also my podcast. I really, giving back to young and emerging leaders. So I want to really grow that and help as many people with that, and certainly the other content. And then spiritually, is I want to be someone that gives first. I want to find different ways that I can give my time, my finances, different ways that I can help people, because when I help others, that really helps me, feel like I'm fulfilling my mission.
I love that. Um, just as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm curious, what is your health plan look like? Your longevity plan? What does that look like? Is it just strength and conditioning? Is there a nutrition component? Is there supplements? What is that all? What's your
Yeah,
whole protocol?
I've debated. I so this are the things right now. I'm not doing much with supplements, although I have listened to a lot of different programs, and something that I would consider. But just to break it down, so the physical is that I work out every single day. In doing that, I do either I do some type of 20-minute strength workout. I do a core workout every other day. And then the other days I'll do either an upper body or a leg workout. I also I play tennis, or I do a cardio. When the cardio, it's usually an exercise bike, or if I'm on the road, maybe elliptical. I usually do that 30 to 35 minutes. I have a stretching program that I do every day. And then I also, later in the day, often I will do a daily walk. And that walk is just to get out on nature, 30 minutes. Often I'll listen to a podcast, so I'm feeding my mind as well. And then from the nutrition, I'm far from perfect. I don't, but some of the things I'm experimenting, I've started to do is intermittent fasting, where I try not to eat for between 12 and 15 hours from my last meal from last night to today. And try to have my eating window a little bit smaller, 8 to 10 hours, that kind of things. I try to eat more nutritious things. I'm not perfect, but for example, like I used to drink Diet Coke. Through my research, I found that that's maybe even as bad, if not worse, than regular Coke. So now I've eliminated pretty much all sodas. So I drink a lot of water and green tea. I do have like my one iced tea, a non-sweetened though. So I've really tried to be more cognizant of eating better. I still have a sweet tooth. My wife's a great baker, so that's been my one challenge. But we both are very health conscious, and I think the last thing I'll say about nutrition is I stop eating usually. I break it once in a while, but very rarely. I stop eating by 6:30 every night, so I give myself that 3 hours. And then the last thing that I think, I'll say two things, is one is sleep. I know there's a lot more research on that, and I really try to focus on getting 7 to 8 hours sleep. I've become more of an early riser, so therefore I'm going to bed, and that's why I try to stop eating by 6:30. And then the last thing that I think is important in the health is taking time to focus on either some type of meditation, sitting quietly. I combine, I do a meditation usually for 20 minutes, and a combination of where I do some imagery, I do some breathing exercises, I do some mantras, and I've enjoyed that, having that. And it's amazing when I sit quietly how things come to me. Because we always want to be on our phones and all that thing. So that's one thing I encourage people is take some time to be quiet.
Yeah, I like how you said that the things come to you. It's a lot easier to go to the thing rather than sitting and waiting for it to come to you. But it will if you give the space, it'll come to you.
Right.
Um, I'm a little curious about intermittent fasting. It's something I've experimented with, and it's something people ask me about a lot. What what is your protocol with that? How long have you been doing it, and what has been your experience so far?
You know, I think it's helped me a little bit. I don't have a pure measurement, but just my protocol is basically, with a rare exception, is I stop eating by 6:30, and my first meal is as early as 8 a.m. Like today, I didn't eat till a little bit after 10 a.m. Okay, so I played tennis early this morning, and then I actually did a little shopping trip, and then I came home, and I ate after that. Uh, so you know what? I've been doing it for probably just over a year. My wife does a similar thing. She's intermittent fasting, and you know what? I'm hearing, I'd say, more information saying that it's probably a positive thing, but there's still a lot to be learned about it, and how effective it is. But I do believe, if you eat just before you go to bed, I think it hurts your sleep, which obviously when you don't sleep well, I think that affects everything in the next day. So I'm really trying to figure out how every day I wake up and I feel pretty good, but the other thing that I really encourage people, because I'm not as busy as I used to be, but even when I was as busy, where I was speaking and coaching and teaching and family and all that, is I always block some time for exercise, and I think that's people forget on how important that is. And you being a trainer, I think you probably appreciate that. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, about the intermittent fasting, my rough understanding, and again, I've heard a lot of different things, and I've also heard that it's kind of in the infancy of a trend, so it's
right.
not too well researched. But I've tried it myself. I've felt great. I had some digestive issues, and I used it at the time. It cleared it up.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, so I just overall, I felt my inflammation go down. sleep quality improved. It sounded like you're doing roughly 8 hour eating window, 16-hour fast.
Yeah.
That was about what I was doing as well.
Mhm.
Um, the one thing I noticed myself is it's hard to get enough protein. It just protein
Yeah.
is very
Yeah.
satiating. So it's if you have a short eating window, you really have to be intentional about
Right.
that protein intake.
Yeah, it's a good
Um,
point. Yep.
so, anyways, that's about the extent to which I have 2 cents on
Right.
that. I'm curious. So you said that you're gearing up. Your mission now is to become a global leader, global speeches and all that. What steps do you plan on taking, or are you taking to really get there? What's the plan? How do you see that coming to fruition?
Yeah, so my plan is I want to continue to grow myself to be more attractive, and then the second piece is growing my network. The more you can help others, and they can help you. The reciprocation process is really important. So and certainly things like even I have my own podcast, as I said, with a couple other people, but I also have been interviewed by quite a few podcasts. So the more that can get out there and share your message, the more I think people would become attracted to you, and that's what I'm really trying to do is continue to grow my network, I've had a few nibbles overseas. I haven't gotten anything to this point, but I'm going to stay with it. So
For sure. What's your podcast? And I'll include links to your podcast everywhere this
sure,
video is posted. But what's it
yeah,
called? And you do it
it's
with
called
John.
the Limitless Leadership Lounge. And the whole concept behind it, Jake, it was actually, when we went through COVID, that's when I really became listening to podcasts. And I said, you know what? As I mentioned, my first job as a head coach didn't go very well. And I thought I knew what it was to be a leader, and I certainly didn't. And so I said, you know what? Now that I'm 65 years old, back then it was probably 62 when we started. I want to give back to young leaders and try to help them get off to a better start than I did. And so that's, we've interviewed leaders from all over the world, and it's been a really neat experience. So.
Awesome. And then, so you mentioned how much? It's close to 200 episodes, right? Did you say 180?
Yeah, we're I think about 180. We've done it for over 3 years. I'm not exactly sure, but around that, about
Okay. So
180. Yeah.
so for someone like myself, I'm about 40 episodes in. What have been some of the podcasting lessons that you've learned? What have been the biggest areas of growth, maybe both individually and you as a podcaster, but then also in the reach and the growth?
So the two things I'll say is one, it's helped me immensely, and I think it's helped my two colleagues on being better question askers. So I think we do a better job now of researching and not really try to go off the whim. But at the same time, I think the best podcasts are when you have good questions, but you become a much better listener, so you can delve deeper. Which I think you're doing a good job. You're listening to my answers, and then you can bridge off of that. So having some prep with your questions, but then really how you can dig deeper. And then the second piece is really expanding your network. And when you get a good guest, do you have anybody in your network? We've mentioned Devin Sizemore is connected and he's been on both of our podcasts. Having those types of people. It's funny because we've gone where at times we've struggled getting guests, and now we have a huge queue. That's not an issue for us right now. So now it's really getting, and vetting and making sure that the guests are going to be good. And then I would say the last piece of advice is when you get guests, there's three factors. One, are they a good guest? Can they share good stories? They can share a powerful message. Number two is, are they willing to help promote? Some people will. And then thirdly is, do they have a name in their industry? That does help. But I would say I'd rather have a person that has a big network, that may not be as famous, but it's willing to help promote, because that's how you grow your podcast. And then certainly you got to do things on your own. We're trying to grow our YouTube, so we send links to ask people to do that. And I'll text people our links and that kind of thing, and just try to stay connected through our podcast. So.
What have been some of your favorite episodes? And I'll go check them out on my walks this week.
Well, you know what? We've had. I'll say we've had some really good ones. A few, we had Mark Victor Hansen and his wife. Mark Victor Hansen was a co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul. We had this gentleman named Clint Pulvers become, he's a musician and he's become a very big speaker. But Clint has a really powerful story back. We have another Hall of Fame speaker, David Horsiger, was really powerful. Um, and we've had another guy, Chad Hymas, that's a Hall of Fame speaker. He's in a wheelchair, and boy, is he inspirational. He lives out in Utah. Another guy, Don Yeager, that has written like 12 New York Times best-selling books, and Don's become a friend of mine. Another really powerful storyteller, and we've had many, many more. I mean, it would be impossible to, but we've had. Peter Thompson would be an example for your audience. Brian Tracy is a big personal growth guy that's still alive. Well, Peter Thompson is known as the Brian Tracy of Europe. So he's a big name over there, and he's a great storyteller. So there's some, but I can't use all of them because I take up all your time here.
Yeah, yeah, 180 episodes. I'm sure you've had a lot of really cool
Yeah.
conversations. What lessons from coaching basketball have translated over to this kind of new phase where you're speaking, you're doing your workshops, you're podcasting? What are some of the parallels that you see in these quote
There's a
unquote different
lot.
worlds?
As I talk about these 7 leadership principles, I can share them quick if you'd like. Is that so? We talk about how to clarify your mission or vision. In doing that, we talk about personal mission and core values. We talk about how to build trust. Okay, and one of the things I encourage people is they develop a trust plan. Another one we do is how do you create an edge for your team. Another one we talk about is how to be an effective communicator. Uh, Number 5 is leading by example. You got to model. I kid leaders that you got to be the CRO, the Chief Reminding Officer, which means you got to share what the mission and the value is all about, but you got to live them too. Then having a clarity about your leadership philosophy, which I call leave a profit. And then the 7th, which I've done a lot of studying in the last 15 years, and something I really implemented, is how to be a servant leader. That you're going to always give first, and how, I believe the best servant leaders give first, and they're always trying to develop their people.
And then so you've mentioned this a couple of times. Service, that was one of the core values you brought up at the
Yeah.
beginning. It's coming back here. Um, what do you get out of service? Like, what is it? I mean, you mentioned the story with J Mac. His mom coming up, saying this was the best gift you ever give her. You break down. That might be kind of exemplify this, but yeah. What motivates you about service?
I like this question. Here's why. Because early in my life, I didn't get it. It was really more, I was self centered, and it was all about, how do I, I was into self improvement, but I wasn't thinking so much on how I could improve others. Yeah. And it really took me a while, but probably in my 30s, I realized that you know what? The most effective people are given mindset of how can they give first and how can they serve and make the world a better place. And I don't like to say this, but that was not my life in my 20s. My life was really all about me. And when I really started to understand the power of being a servant leader and the power of serving first, life got so much better for me. You always think that if you give first, you're not going to get anything back. But what I've found is just the opposite. When you give first, often you get much more in return. And even if you don't, as I mentioned, the late John Wooden, was his father gave him a creed for life, and one of the elements of the creed was you can't live a perfect day without giving to someone somewhere without any expectation of return. And I think that's a really powerful concept. Again, in my 20s, I did not get that at all. I was like, I'm not only going to give, you give first. And then I figured out, no, I'm going to give. And even if somebody doesn't give back, that's okay. The world will reward you in another way.
Yeah, I love that. I'm 28 right now, so I think I'm kind of coming up on hopefully the end of a selfish era. I'm as I reflect on my younger years, I realized I was self-centered in a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to do more. I'm curious. It's kind of like a karma kind of idea, you give and you get back. How do you think that works? What or why do you think that works? I should say.
Well, I am a person, I don't think I'm over the top, but I do believe in God and Jesus Christ. And you know what? If learn about Jesus Christ, that's his mission. He was giving first, and really that service mindset has been back for many, many years. It just sometimes goes to the back burner, and is something, again, I didn't really comprehend that concept very well until we probably got into my 30s, and then realized that this is so. I just think it's the more that I try to figure out, Jake, I think it's just the way the world is designed, although a lot of us don't understand it. And I don't really understand why it's designed that way, but I just know that if you are a giver first, that those people tend to have a lot given back to them.
Yeah, I love that. All right, last question is, what are you most excited about going forward? You've, I can tell just from your demeanor. I mentioned it already in this conversation. You've got that I call it spirit, call it energy. Um, you're an excited person. So what's driving that? What's at the core of that for you looking forward?
It's just that each day I want to get a little bit better and be the best person I can be. And if I can give first, like it's really cool. I'll just share a quick story. So, I retired, and my assistant coach that was with me for 16 years, now the head coach, and he's been, this is his ninth year, and he's taken six teams to the Section 5 finals. And this year's the first time they won. And I was heartbreak for him, but the cool thing is now they've won two close games in the state qualifier, and then they just won the state quarterfinal yesterday by a point. So now they are going to go to the final four, and I am so excited for him. And the fact that because he's had his trials and tribulations, getting to six finals, but is really excited. And I think the more this is another thing I really try to teach my players, but much easier said than done. But I really want to encourage your audiences. I think that next step to be a more effective leader is when you're happy for other people's success. And that, again, was not something I was very good at, especially in my 20s. So,
I love that. Yeah, I think that's perfect place to wrap up. And yeah, but I really appreciate this. It was a really cool conversation, and
thanks, Jake.
yeah, thanks for bringing the juice. This
Yeah,
is. I hope that when I'm 65, I've got the juice I'm seeing right here.
absolutely. Thank you.